the ring around Iran is tightening, and tensions between Tehran and Washington are once again at their peak. The United States is moving large military forces to the Middle East, including aircraft carrier battle groups, fighter jets, ground forces, and a submarine, removing any doubt that an American blow against Iran is approaching. However, President Trump is signaling that he has decided at this stage to delay direct military action against Iran while continuing his rhetorical pressure against the regime and to move American military forces forward. Iran's president had a message of his own for President Trump, declaring that harming Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei means a declaration of war on the Iranian nation. And meanwhile, Iranian state TV was hacked and Raza Pahlavi appeared on screen for several minutes saying Iranians continue the struggle, freedom is closer than ever. There were also some signs of cracking in the Revolutionary Guards, including a rising number of senior officials fleeing and taking large amounts of money with them. But United Nations experts are silent in the face of the horrors in Iran while rushing to condemn Israel. And in a related story, the Trump administration is discussing the possibility of offering asylum to the Jews of Britain, telling British media outlets that England has become an Islamic country that is no longer a safe place for Jews. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host, Yair Pinto, bringing you the whole truth about what's happening in this region and in Israel. This is no longer an assessment, but a fact on the ground. The United States military is in the midst of a massive deployment of forces towards the Middle East, while America's immediate strike capability is indisputable. And the latest reports show that President Trump is not settling for a sting, but is considering a far broader action. 2 American aircraft carriers are making their way to the Arabian Sea alongside movement of refueling aircrafts and additional large naval forces. As for Iran, the regime stands at a crossroads after a wave of intense protests that have claimed thousands of lives and left the survivors deeply shaken. For about 3 weeks, the regime has maintained control through brutal internal repression, but all the problems that prompted the protests remain unsolved. Another problem that the regime has is messaging. The Iranian state television was hacked on Sunday, and on several channels, footage of the Iranian protesters was shown alongside calls by Iran's exiled prince, Raza Pahlavi, calling on the people to join the demonstrations. So the United States and Israel are weighing the continuation of the military and the diplomatic activity, while it seems that the entire region's future depends on President Trump's decisions. And meanwhile, in the Gaza Strip, there is an observable rise in Hamas's motivation to rebuild and to act against the IDF. Following President Trump's announcement about the establishment of the Peace Council, senior officials in the security system warned about their impact on the terrorist organization. According to those officials, Hamas is working to rehabilitate itself and may be planning an attack against the IDF soldiers on the Yellow Line. The terror organization still aspires to create the Hezbollah model in Gaza and has no apparent intention of giving up its weapons and will do everything to drag out time. In addition, bringing Turkey and also Qatar into the Peace Council has caused new issues, as there is resolute opposition in the IDF to Qatar's involvement in rebuilding the Gaza Strip, since it is the financial patron of the Muslim Brotherhood. In the Israeli security system, they were not surprised by the announcement of the composition of the Peace Council and the Palestinian Authority's foothold. But right now, on the ground, Hamas is strengthening even before the funding from Doha, and while reserve forces continue to guard the Yellow Line, the terrorist organization is operating according to an organized plan, and every day that passes, it advances on the list of goals that it set for itself. Hamas is building systematic loyalty that will hold up against any decision of this committee or any other committee. We'll also talk about President Trump's alternative plan to the United Nations. And according to a draft of the charter document of the council Trump is funding, countries will be required to pay $1 billion for a permanent seat on the Peace Council of the United States. Member states will serve for 3 years, but this role will not apply to member states that contribute more than $1 billion to the Peace Council within the first year of the Charter's entry into force. Trump will be the chairman, and by virtue of this position will control the funds and will also set the agenda of the council meetings. So, as you can see, we have a lot to talk about today, but let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report, bringing you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel on day 836 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region that are taking their orders from Iran's Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And a moment before we start, I want to call on you to help us spread the truth, share this content, make sure you tell your neighbors, your friends what's happening here in this land, and pray for the situation. Now, to start with the real news, these days in the space between the Arabian Sea and the Gulf, you can feel the tension. The American aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln is making its way into an operating range opposite Iran, together with its strike group, and the message on the ground is clear. This is not another warning, but preparation for the option of a broad blow. When an aircraft carrier enters the picture, it means that the clock starts running in Tehran, in Jerusalem, and for every proxy organization waiting for the order. In the last 24 hours, the picture has sharpened. The Pentagon is talking about a force buildup, not a pinpoint strike, and this is a concentration that gives the president options, including an aerial strike, waves of sorties, and sustained precise fire over time. And according to reports, Lincoln is moving quickly, and in parallel, there is a possibility that an additional aircraft carrier, the George Bush, might be on its way. It left its home port on January 16, but at this stage, it is still not officially confirmed, and the Pentagon is not rushing to confirm it. Inside this envelope, there are also destroyers, maritime strike assets, and at least one attack submarine that adds a layer of quiet capability, cruise missiles, intelligence collection, and the threat that you don't see until it's already hitting you. On the air, the story is range and endurance, including fighter jets arriving from Europe and movements of refueling aircrafts preparing the route for long sorties. This is not for show, as aerial refueling is the difference between a short sortie and an operation that can sustain the tempo. When you see refueling aircrafts multiplying, you're seeing preparation for an attack that requires depth, repetition, and hours in the air. In addition, it's not only sea and air power, but regional bases which are being reinforced. This includes El Ubeida, the air base in Qatar, which is the major anchor in this region with around 10,000 American military personnel. Everyone understands that if there is an Iranian response to a United States-led strike, those bases will be amongst the first targets. That too is part of the game. And it's prompted the Pentagon to send its forces across additional bases in Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, and also Iraq to enable operational continuity and also to reduce the impact of a concentrated strike. For its part, Iran is making its usual threats, but far more directly than usual. The message that we keep hearing from them is that any harm to the supreme leader is a declaration of total war against the Iranian nation, which will prompt a response with full force. That is a red line that they are setting loudly to create deterrence, but also to prepare the Iranian street for war if it comes. And while the world looks at the map, inside Iran, this is a time of fear, as the protests against the regime continue to generate harsh testimonies. The official report speaks of at least 5,000 fatalities, but in unofficial reports, the number jumps to around 16,000. I can't get into the specifics of what witnesses have recounted, because if I do, this video will be blocked on social media, but they sound a lot like atrocities which we saw here in Israel on October 7th. Security forces are opening aggressively fire with one goal: to break the street and to restore control. Part of that strategy also relies on proxy organizations that the Iranian regime imported into the arena, including Iraqi Shia militias and even Hezbollah operatives who have been brought in to reinforce the Basij militia and the regime's security apparatus. This is a familiar move. When there is no trust that the local forces will hold up against the rage in the streets, they bring the external forces. Tougher, less connected to the population, and less hesitate to use violence against the people of Iran. And there is also, as always, another front, the narrative and the media front. And this week, a very unusual event took place. A breach into Iranian state television broadcasts via satellite transmissions received in the homes of Iranians, but for minutes, documentations of the protest and messages against the regime were broadcasted. This included a message from the former Crown Prince, Reza Pahlavi, not to give up, to continue, and a call to the security forces not to point weapons at the people. Millions of Iranians saw this message, and that's important because despite the internet shutdown, television is still a central tool of control. When it is breached, it's not only a cyber event, it's a blow to the image of the regime that wants to cultivate that daring control in the situation. The disconnection of the population from the internet is another key element in their strategy. Scattered reports indicate that in most of Iran, all people see is a black screen. That lets the regime work under the radar with less documentation, less coordination between protesters, and less ability for the world to see in real time what's happening. But even here, there are workarounds, including satellite internet, point connection, and a flow of information that drip out despite of everything. And while all of this is going on here in Jerusalem, we are not sitting on the sidelines. Israel is on high alert, both for defensive purposes and also for scenarios of regional flare-up. The meaning on the ground is high readiness in the air defensive arrays, close coordinations with the United States of America, and preparations for a situation in which Iran will try to respond through missiles, UAVs, or through proxies in the different arenas. However, there is also Israeli readiness for the possibility of action in Iran if the door opens and if a decision is made. However, I must be very candid with you about something. All sides in this drama are putting out partial information. There are gaps between the reports, manipulations, and there is also psychological warfare from all sides. But the overall picture of the last 24 hours does not leave much room for doubt. The United States is building conditions for a bigger move. Iran is threatening with red lines, and the Iranian street is still boiling under suppression, and Israel is standing on its feet, with our eyes to the sky and a finger on the pulse as the entire region is entering a time window in which every small decision can ignite a huge event. Speaking of which, the question that leads us immediately to the next piece in this article is, if Tehran is boiling and the world is watching it, how is Hamas in the Gaza Strip trying to exploit the moment to strengthen itself once more, and how is the IDF preparing both on the ground and in the diplomatic arena for a transition into phase 2 of the ceasefire agreement? Because that's how it is in this war. There isn't just one front, it's all combined. So let's continue to the news from the Gaza Strip, but a moment before we do that, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss another episode of Boots on the Ground. And speaking of boots on the ground, I want to speak to you for just a moment about an organization that always has its boots on the ground whenever there's trouble. I'm speaking about Magen David Adom. When Iranian missiles landed in Tel Aviv last June, the first people out on the ground were the volunteers of Magen David Adom. Before the police or the army or anyone else arrived, Magen David Adom medics were already treating the wounded, stabilizing the injured, and saving lives. They don't wait for it to be safe. They rush towards the danger. That's who they are. That's what they do. But being ready for the next emergency, whatever it is, if it's rocket, tear, heart attack, or anything else, it takes more than just bravery. It takes ambulances, armored vehicles, protective gear, and trauma equipment, and trained teams ready to act at a moment's notice. And that's where we come in, because your support makes that possible. So if you want to save lives in Israel, go to savelifeisrael.com. Again, that's savelifeisrael.com. Help Magen David Adom stay strong, stay fast, and stay ready for whatever comes next. When time is short and lives are on the line, they're already underway. So let's make sure that they can keep saving lives again and again. And now, we're shifting our focus to the Gaza Strip because over the weekend, in the central parts of Gaza, the ceasefire that almost blew up was right on the yellow line. A cell of 6 Hamas terrorists set out to attack IDF positions, but they were quickly dealt with. Unfortunately, 2 soldiers were wounded by shrapnel, but thanks God, there were no fatalities. A few hours later, a precise response also came from the air, and the IDF and the Shin Bet confirmed that 3 terrorists were eliminated who were involved in force building and preparing another attack against our troops. They included Muhammad Khuli, the commander of operations department in the Nusirat area in Gaza, Asraf Adnan, the commander of the rocket and the missile array of central Gaza, and Saeed El-Rahman, who's responsible for the sniper array in the Deir el-Balach battalion. Why does that matter? Because while the world is looking at Tehran, Hamas is trying to exploit the moment to lift its head in Gaza. The pattern on the ground is clear. In recent months, Hamas is not only surviving, it is regrouping and restoring organizational order, rebuilding a civil-military control whose purpose is to remain the de facto ruler, even if a committee or a technocratic government is established on paper. In the north of the Gaza Strip, in Jabalia, terrorists were already seen openly in December. And in parallel, in Gaza, west of the Yellow Line, Hamas is advancing with an orderly plan, funded by taxes that it collects from the private sector. It also deploys police forces, rehabilitates the health infrastructure, and gradually restores the court systems and education systems. These are control points with no substitute because they include professions that everyone needs, like teachers, doctors, municipal clerks, and the courts. Whoever controls there, from the bottom up, creates a systemic loyalty that holds even against any international body that is established above. The security establishment has observed all this activity, and it has led them to warn the political echelon that there is an increase in Hamas motivation and boldness to rehabilitate and plan attacks against the IDF soldiers on the Yellow Line. From Hamas's perspective, the latest messages from Washington are perceived as an opportunity, and now they aspire to create a Hezbollah model in Gaza, including a weakened civilian government above, but a strong armed organization underneath. This organization will not give up its weapons, but will oversee the beginning of civilian reconstruction on the ground while the military wing goes back to war. In the IDF, they already see the signs. This includes intelligence indicating that Hamas has already restarted rocket production lines and stealing from the civilian economy. Hamas is collecting double taxes on goods that enter the civilian marketplace, and we're talking about tens of millions of shekels accumulating in its coffers. The hundreds of trucks entering the Gaza Strip every single day are supposed to provide a civilian population with what it needs, but it's being used to provide Hamas with what it wants, primarily money that it takes in the form of taxation on goods that are supposed to be distributed to the Palestinian people for free. In this situation, the defense mission falls mainly on the IDF reserves. Now, the Alexandroni Brigade is replacing the Jerusalem 16 Brigade, which held the Yellow Line in the center and in the north of the Gaza Strip in recent months, but they are engaged in the same race against time. Together with the Asylum combat engineering unit, they have located hundreds of terrorist infrastructures above but also below the ground, as well as weapons warehouses and other terrorist infrastructures that they are working around the clock to demolish, all of them. This is part of the operational logic. Every day that the IDF is deployed in this area, they have the opportunity to demolish this terrorist infrastructure and weaken Hamas's ability to use it to attack IDF troops and Israeli civilians in the future. Now, we're keeping our focus on Gaza, but switching to the diplomatic front. The White House Special Envoy Steve Witkoff recently announced a move to the second stage of the ceasefire plan, which includes a transition to a process of disarmament, technocratic governance, and reconstruction. The White House also published the composition of the managing committee that will oversee the move under the Peace Council that will be headed by President Trump and above the new Palestinian technocratic government. The list also includes the Turkish foreign minister and a senior figure in the Qatari government, and this immediately sets off a red light in Jerusalem. The Prime Minister's office announced that the composition was not coordinated with Israel and is contrary to its policy. But it's important to understand that the security establishment was not surprised by this at all. In recent months in Jerusalem, they went over drafts and names, and some of the candidates underwent deep vetting, including by the Shin Bet in Israel, while the information was conveyed to the cabinet. And according to sources familiar with the talks, there is no intensive coordination on its way between Jerusalem and Washington to smooth things out and to restore full agreement. Even when there are disputes, both sides work closely to reach the full coordination, because the alternative is chaos in Gaza, and it's dangerous for everyone. And now, with all of that having been said, we need to ask why Israel is concerned about Turkey and Qatar. It's because these are two countries with deep influence on Islamic axis and with a history of money and influence entering the Gaza Strip. For instance, the IDF recalls how Hamas became a terror monster before October 7th, in part and it thanks the hundreds of millions of dollars that came in cash from Qatar. There is a sentence that sums up the concern. For every kilo of cement that entered for civilian reconstruction, too much concrete went into the tunnels. Therefore, in the IDF, they oppose Qatar's involvement in reconstruction unequivocally, while pointing to alternatives such as organized fundraising, aid funds, use of the World Bank, and enlisting countries like the United Arab Emirates to contribute on similar scales without strengthening Hamas behind the scenes. And in parallel, President Trump is planning another move at the economic conference in Davos. He is expected to lead dozens of leaders in a broad international condemnation of Hamas. After that, according to the plan, all the new governing bodies, including Turkey and Qatar, will present Hamas with an unequivocal demand to disarm. The assessment in the political system is that if Hamas rejects the demand, Trump will give Israel a green light to handle the problem. But even if Hamas says yes, everyone understands that it could be only partial and will require tight supervision. Within all of this, there is also a pressure point that continues to burn. The last hostage who has not yet been returned, Ran Gaveli. From Washington's perspective, this is still at the top of their priorities, but from Hamas's perspective, it's another lever to drag time. The bottom line is that Hamas is trying to build rule from below and to restore its firepower from above. And the IDF is holding the yellow line, striking commanders and preparing options for the next move if the demand for disarmament will fail. The question that leads us to the next piece is this: is this the end of the United Nations? Let me know what you think. So, another big question is, will the Jews of England come to Israel or immigrate to the United States because England is no longer safe? We'll get to all of that, so keep spreading the truth, share, follow us. Most importantly, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so that you remain tuned to what's happening in Israel, boots on the ground style. At the United Nations headquarters in New York, while the streets in Iran are boiling and the regime is crushing the protesters with brutal force, what you mostly hear from the UN is silence. Then a new report arrives that draws that gap in black and white. The report examines 54 special experts of the Human Rights Council and determines that many of them avoided condemnation of the repression in Iran since late December, but did publish again and again harsh statements against Israel. And this connects directly to what's happening in Washington. President Trump is pushing a new framework, a peace council, a committee meant to be an alternative international body, with one chair who holds the agenda and the funds. According to the draft charter that leaked, countries would be able to join for 3 years, but whoever pays $1 billion could secure a permanent seat for itself. The message is clear: less UN bureaucracy, more American control, more money that comes straight to this mission. And in the background, Trump is already talking about an American exit from dozens of UN organizations and additional international bodies. This is not a declaration of dismantling the United Nations, but it is a blow to its legitimacy, just as the whole world sees Iran burning and asks why the moral compass isn't pointing there. So, is this the end of the United Nations? Maybe not the official end, but the beginning of an era in which states are looking for an alternative. And the next question is already waiting for us. If international institutions are shaking, what happens when the street in Europe shakes? Specifically, what happens when Britain becomes a place where Jews are afraid to live in, and Trump offers them to move to Israel or to the United States? So here, at TBN Israel, we're trying to reach as many people as possible with what's happening in this land, with truth, because there's so much propaganda. So the situation has become so bad that Jews are immigrating to Israel from European countries in large and increasing numbers due to anti-Semitic persecution, which is fueled by this fake news. And this is where we must fight it, by spreading the truth. We are fighting together to share what's happening so that you will be able to know how to pray for the peace of Jerusalem and for the situation. In Washington, an unusual conversation has begun in recent days, mostly behind closed doors, about the possibility of granting asylum to British Jews. This is not just more general statements, but a real discussion about visas and immigration. This is a major event because when the United States talks about asylum for refugees fleeing another Western country, it's a sign that the ground in Europe is already shaken beneath people's feet. The personal attorney of the United States President, Robert Gershon, a Manchester native, says plainly that Britain is no longer a safe place for Jews. He points to an attack at a synagogue in Manchester on Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, and amidst a wave of incidents since October 7, he also added a sentence that hits you in the gut. First, you'll come for the Jews, then for your pubs, which is a warning about areas that will surrender to extremism and to Sharia law if the authorities do not stop it. On the ground, it is already seeping into culture and into the education. The number of schools marketing International Holocaust Remembrance Day has declined from more than 2,000 high schools in 2023 to only 854 in 2024, a drop of almost 60%. And at the same time, surveys in Britain show that for the first time in a decade, a majority of British Jews do not see a future in the country, and 61% have already considered leaving in the past 2 years. And from here, Israel enters the picture. In Jerusalem, they keep saying the natural home of British Jews is the State of Israel, and plans are being made to increase aliyah, absorption, and community. So I want us to pray for the Jews who do not live in Israel. We are all praying for your well-being and for your security. We pray for peace with Israel. We pray for the IDF soldiers that are fighting on multiple fronts. We pray for the people of Iran that need our support, that need our help. God can make all of that happen. He's in control. Remember that. Have a personal connection with Him. Keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.